and thank you for your kind remarks in the presentation. Let me just say from the beginning, I don't consider myself the central figure in the struggle to defeat the anti-affirmative action referendum. I consider myself a part of a coalition of central figures in the movement, and we certainly should give great credit to Mayor Bob Lanier. He's an extraordinarily progressive white mayor of Houston, and one of my mentors. From the very beginning, we saw the need to organize a broad-based, multiracial coalition to defeat this effort. Take a few minutes. I think we got some more students to present.
Just two. You go ahead.
Okay. 2 more. Let me just say a couple of things. In addition to thanking you, just to relate that I started, and my view of things is a little bit different, so I want to put it in context. But I started where you are right now. I started as a student, entering college, where I was touched by a very gifted professor at the University of Texas at Austin. And when I entered school there were 200 African American students out of 40,000 students on campus. 500 Hispanic students and 1,000 foreign students. Very much culturally oppressive. But this extraordinary faculty member, and I count Dr. Claiborne as one of those, and so you're very lucky to be in this class. And we've worked together on projects, and so I know of what I speak. And I can see from the quality of your presentations too, that you have a special opportunity. Well, you touched a number of us. There's an African-American professor in sociology, taught a class, Gordon Johnson, 347K Black Americans. And over the summer, before the fall semester, he began kind of reaching out to a couple of the student leaders. One of them was one of my roommates, who was chairman of the Black Student Union. My other roommate was president of A5A, and I produced and hosted the first radio and television programs out of Central Texas and Austin at the university. And so I went through this process, and it kind of changed my life. You never know what encounter or serendipity may cause you to have some different thoughts about what there is. So I've always taken the view with regard to my life that it's not about me and how to just take care of my family, my loved ones. I always felt that I was part of a long history of people that had an obligation, responsibility to make things better, not just for my family, but for all families. As Nikki Leland, I very much am a human rights activist, but I'm also very much an activist, someone who sees themselves as a servant on behalf of people of African ancestry. Some say descent, I like to say ancestry. The very first article that was ever written publicly about me was when I was at the University of Texas as a student, and it was by Houston Chronicle. It's entitled "To Be Alive is to Be Committed." Committed to this struggle for social justice and social change. So I do things a little bit differently. And part of that is my view of history. Most of us, when we think about history, we think about heroes and sheroes. You know, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, Fannie Lou Hamer, and others. That's a heroic view of history. Famous people who've made major contributions. Or we think of history often in terms of episodes. The trial and tribulations of the Middle Passage and enslavement, the Civil War, the Civil Rights Movement, Jim Crow segment. Those are episodes, epic history. But really the struggle of African people, the study, the history of people, is more like a saga. The story of a never-ending, ongoing story of African people and people in their struggle for social justice and social change. And so when the opportunity emerged for me to be part of that struggle, I simply saw myself as one other person among many people who stepped up and stepped into that role. And this, again, reflects back on you, and I think my first encounters with the county. Because somebody stopped by my African import and export store one day and said, "Who are you?" And I did the same thing Kara said. "My name is Jew Don Boney." I said, "No, that's your name. That's not who you are. That's the name that they call you by. Who are you? What is your purpose in life? What do you see as your role?" And that process of reflection just kind of led me naturally into whatever it is that I see myself as now, which is a continuing servant till the end of my days to make things better for my people and thereby all people. And so I was elected to city council in 1995. In 1997, several things happened. The Proposition 209 had passed in California, that movement being led by Ward Connolly, who's an African American, that ended all affirmative action programs in California, particularly targeted at higher education. And Lee P. Brown, who was the first African American to serve as police chief in Houston, Texas, was running for mayor. Lee P. Brown is the first and only African American ever to serve as mayor of Houston. This fellow, Ed Bloom, who by the way never served in Congress, I think he did run, but he was defeated, began organizing an anti-affirmative action movement in Houston. And this was part of a national movement. Affirmative action really was a term first coined and used by John F. Kennedy in 1961. Affirmative action as a means to mitigate the suffering, the results of abject racism and discrimination over the course of the years. And that affirmative steps need to be taken by government and business. What the anti-affirmative action said was preferential treatment. I don't share that view as preferential treatment. So words matter, language matters, policy matters, laws matter, and to be able to be effective in advancing your point of view or the things you believe, you actually do need to be trained in language, in writing, in law, in public policy. Hence, you are here learning some of the techniques and art of persuasion and how to use words and language and understand and interpret words, language, and policy for the benefit of those interests, those people, those issues that you are concerned about. So what happened in California was basically the anti-affirmative action people tricked the electorate. They call themselves a civil rights initiative. How could an initiative and people who opposed everything that Martin Luther King and the civil rights movement was about then label themselves the Civil Rights Initiative? So from the very beginning, they were cloaking and hiding what their objective really was. Secondly, they wrote that long proposition that Kara put up on the screen as to what Proposition 209 represented. Well, you know a lot about people, and sometimes we don't always tell you often enough that you're among our best, because the majority of African Americans don't go to college. They don't have a four-year degree, much less a graduate degree. So when you're looking at a population that's undereducated, not literate, does not understand the subtleties of language, of law, of policy. A lot of people voted for Proposition 209 that were black people thinking they were voting for affirmative action. It was a trick from the very beginning. So we had the benefit of this earlier history that we understood, those of us who did the work, who read the documents, who read the journals, who read the articles, read the papers, who talked to public officials across the country. We understood what the trick was. And so Ed Bloom met in California with Ward Connolly and his group, and then brought that movement to Texas. He recruited an African American, an Asian, to be part of the people out front, so they looked like a diverse group. And they began to say, well, the City of Houston's Affirmative Action program, the city, that set goals, not quotas, but goals for minority business involvement. First, you have to understand that there was a time when no black businesses did any business with the City of Houston at all. There are three categories: construction, professional services, and purchasing. The City of Houston is, I don't have the actual numbers with me, it's almost $1 trillion business. Not just in terms of the annual budget, but the money we influence, the money that we borrow for debts, the money we pay on debt servicing for bonds, the money that goes into pensions, as well as the everyday, hundreds of billions of taxpayer dollars are built to provide these services for the citizens of Houston. And there was a time when 100% of that money went to white businesses. So now the question is, when you open up your business, your marketing firm, your accounting firm, your architecture firm, your construction firm, what chance do you have to compete against these businesses that are established, who've been doing business for 20 years, to approach and market and compete with your product and services with basically all white department heads? Not much of a chance.